I know I've told this story before, but I swear it's relevant. About 8 years ago now, I found Indy as a homeless 3-month-old puppy. He looked like this at the time. I got him because I was severely depressed, and my psychiatrist thought that a dog would help. She said dog, not puppy. I should have been more specific. Because, dear viewer, I spent most of our first few months together just desperately trying to keep Indy alive. Not only was he constantly trying to jump out of windows and eating whatever he could find on the ground, but there were also days when I wanted to throw him out of the window myself. If you've never had to take care of a puppy while severely depressed and alone, let me tell you, it's actually not that fun. He refused to poop outside for weeks. He chewed anything within chewing distance. He cried whenever I left him alone in another room. And while I think of myself as someone who had never hurt an innocent animal because they were annoying the shit out of me, I have to admit where there were times when I wondered if one of the reasons that I made it through those first few months was because Indy looked like this. He'd look up from gnawing on an expensive shoe and give me those giant brown eyes and the velvety soft ears and his fluffy little tail, and all of my annoyance would melt away. Well, most of my annoyance. Enough to avoid defenestration. A lot of research has gone into figuring out why exactly Indy is so unbelievably cute. Okay, not just Indy, but all domestic dogs and cats, and recently, maybe raccoons. Yeah, raccoons. Today I want to talk about why raccoons are so cute. And in classic Rebecca fashion, I did start this video as just a quick fun diversion from talking about things that make my brain hurt. And obviously I fell into a cute, fluffy little rabbit's hole in the process. So let's get into it. The topic of raccoon cuteness is hot right now in part because people on TikTok and other social media sites are full of excitement about a recent study that seems to suggest that raccoons are becoming domesticated.
Obviously, don't go and do that.
Now, you do whatever you like.
We can't condone anything of the sort.
No, we can't. Live!
Raccoons have long been one of the internet's favorite meme animals, so obviously this research has led to a lot of people hopeful that they will soon have a funny little trash panda all of their own. Tracking domestication signals across populations of North American raccoons via citizen science-driven image repositories was published in October in Frontiers in Zoology, and it does encompass a few of my favorite things. Cute animals, yes, but also it's open access, available in full, and it involves citizen science efforts that I myself have participated in. Specifically, they use raccoon photos taken by regular people and logged on the iNaturalist app, which logs each species, date, and time of observation for researchers to access for their studies. Fun fact about iNaturalist, I've used it to help various projects in the past, like tide pool bioblitzes and researchers studying how high and low king tides get in the Bay Area. But a few months ago, I was reading about a true crime story where a woman murdered her family by feeding them poisonous mushrooms. And I learned that she harvested those mushrooms herself by looking up posts on iNaturalist. That is obviously horrible. No one should do that, the killing part. But also, I've been learning about mushroom foraging myself, and I had never thought about using iNaturalist to help find them. So I immediately opened the app, sorted by recent observations of fungi, and then I went out on a hike to find the mushrooms and observe their characteristics. And it was really fun. Like Pokemon Go, but if you eat the Pokemon, you might trip balls or die. Anyway, these researchers, led by Dr. Rafaela Leish, a biologist at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, gathered 20,000 or so photos of raccoons and compared measurements of their snouts. They found that raccoons in urban areas had snouts that were 3.5% shorter than raccoons in rural areas. Why does that matter? Because of something called domestication syndrome, which is the hypothesis that suggests that all domesticated animals develop certain physical characteristics regardless of how or why they were domesticated. For instance, we might want to domesticate a certain wild animal to, say, produce delicious milk for our morning coffee. Domestication syndrome suggests that even though we'd be breeding to select for delicious milk, that wild animal will also end up smaller, less aggressive towards humans, and with floppier ears and a fluffier tail and, a shorter muzzle. So Leish argues in this paper that the shorter snouts on urban raccoons may be evidence that they are becoming more domesticated in the same way that dogs likely became domesticated, living in close proximity to humans and finding ways to get access to our scraps by either outsmarting our trash cans or looking and acting so cute and harmless that we can't help but give them the occasional tasty snack, which you should not do. Do not do that. Do not aid in the domestication of raccoons, please. So that makes sense, right? Well, some people aren't so sure. Nessie O'Neill is a popular TikTok creator who claims to be a raccoon biologist. This isn't me being shady, just accurate. I am not a raccoon biologist either. I'm not any kind of biologist. So it doesn't invalidate whatever she has to say. I just wasn't able to find any information about her CV or her research. But her website says she works for an exotic pet sanctuary, which is awesome. But I just want to be clear. I have no idea what her actual expertise is in. That said, I did find her video rebutting this new study to be thought-provoking, so I wanted to talk about it. I'm not going to play the entire thing. It's actually quite long by TikTok standards, but she makes a few points that I would like to highlight. The bulk of the video concerns her claim that these authors have simply rediscovered raccoon subspecies, which explains their results.
So I downloaded the data, put it into only the years they were using, and using maps and studies on raccoon biology, I assigned each raccoon their relevant subspecies. This highlighted area, by the way, is because they assigned downtown Pigeon Forge as rural. That's a major tourism hotspot where I research. Those are urban raccoons. Anyways, using the exact same method that the study used for calculating differences in rural to urban skull-snout ratios, I calculated the differences in subspecies. But as you can see, the California raccoon has a ratio that is 5.26% smaller than all the other subspecies. And the Pacific Northwest raccoon is over 2% bigger. And this does align with the actual morphological descriptions of each subspecies. Because yes, some do have shorter snouts. It's for dietary reasons. So here are the different breakdowns. About 12.5% of the raccoons in the urban populations have a snout size that is 5.26% less than the other subspecies. And the Upper Mississippi Valley raccoon and the Pacific Northwest raccoon, with the two largest differences respectively, make up over 8% for urban and 21% here, and then 4.2% and 10.7%. There is such a disparity here.
I had to replay this a few times because for the life of me, I couldn't find the subspecies column in the data. Eventually, I realized that I couldn't find it because what she's saying is that she added that column in by labeling each observation herself using maps and studies on raccoon biology. Here's the thing. Subspecies are a mess. Different subspecies can interbreed with one another, which is why they're still the same species. And they're distinguished by taxonomists based upon where they live and what they look like, for the most part. Also behaviors, but yeah. And that is exactly what the study is looking at, how a species differs depending upon where they live and what they look like. So she has essentially removed the relevant data in order to claim that the conclusion is incorrect. Imagine I have a population of rats living in my garage and a separate population of rats living in my bedroom and sometimes sleeping in my bed. Over many generations, these two populations are different enough that I dub one to be the subspecies of garage rats with the distinct traits of living in the garage and possessing longer snouts and a higher tendency to bite, and the other to be the subspecies of bed rats with the distinct traits of living in the bedroom and having shorter snouts and a lower tendency of biting. If I publish a study showing that proximity to humans appears to result in rats with shorter snouts and a more charming personality, you can't debunk that by saying, well, you're comparing garage rats to bed rats, so it's not valid. There is, of course, an argument to be made in the messier real-world scenario involving raccoon populations, in that populations can overlap more, subspecies may change after the human population in a particular area increases, but you can't explore that by looking at a data set and just guessing at what subspecies that raccoon may be based on where they were observed and going with whatever the average snout length is for that subspecies. O'Neill's opening point is the one I found more interesting. She says that this study is flawed in part because it is entirely based upon a prior flawed study.
This study, which has been referenced all over the internet recently, is fundamentally flawed. To start off with, the basis of the study as a whole is based on another flawed study, Belayev's Russian silver domestic fox study, where it is claimed that over the course of 50 years, foxes from the wild were able to be domesticated, evolving shorter snouts and floppy ears and lighter pigmentation and a friendlier attitude, and curlier tails. Except these foxes weren't from the wild. They were from fur farms on Prince Edward Island in Canada. They were a heavily inbred population. The vast majority of the genetic changes that occurred in Belyaev's study occurred in the foxes while they were on the fur farm. And this domestication study that he did is the only existing study in the world that proves this hypothesis. Did y'all know that he had other failed studies that didn't prove what he was trying to say, including one with otters?
She's referring to this paper from 1979 titled Destabilizing Selection as a Factor in Domestication by Dmitry Belyaev, a Russian biologist who was so committed to understanding how we ended up with dogs that he conducted an elaborate experiment breeding foxes only for their behavior and observing what morphological changes occurred alongside that. This is where the domestication syndrome hypothesis comes from. As they only bred the tamest foxes, over the generations, not only did the foxes become tamer, but also their snouts became shorter, their ears floppier, their fur lighter, their tails bushier. And this mirrors many of the changes we see in other domesticated animals like dogs and mice compared to their wild counterparts, suggesting there might be some underlying connection. O'Neill dismisses Belyaev by pointing out that he failed to domesticate another species, river otters, insinuating that the otters, got pointier snouts or less fluffy tails when being bred for tameness. But in fact, Belyaev was unable to complete the experiment at all because he couldn't get the otters to reproduce. Breeding is kind of an essential aspect of observing the results of selective breeding. She then dismisses the fox study because Belyaev sourced the foxes from fur farms. That is actually a fair criticism. Belyaev was always upfront about where he sourced his foxes, but in the decades since, a popular misconception formed that he had actually used wild foxes that he then domesticated. That, of course, does nothing to invalidate his study. It's just a popular misconception. That said, watching this video led me to discover for the first time this opinion piece in Trends in Ecology and Evolution, published by a team of biologists in 2020, pointing out that many of the physical changes observed in the foxes in that experiment had already begun to be selected for on those farms, something that Belyaev may not have even realized, and we only know now thanks to genetic and historical research. Does this invalidate the silver fox experiment? Absolutely not. It doesn't even invalidate the domestication syndrome hypothesis. It's still just a hypothesis with some data supporting it and some data opposing it. Those biologists argued that the fox experiment is important, but its conclusions are overstated. And so we need to collect more data and explore other hypotheses to explain what we are seeing in domesticated animals. And that, my friends, is exactly what this new study does. It does not in any way prove that raccoons are becoming domesticated, regardless of what people on TikTok or even mainstream news headlines might suggest. That would take two leaps. One, that shorter snouts are a guaranteed sign of domestication, and two, that raccoon snouts are getting shorter because of domestication and not another reason like changing climate. In this study, the researchers found that urban raccoons in cold climates have shorter snouts than their rural counterparts, but they may have longer snouts than rural raccoons from very hot climates. There are a lot of reasons why species might develop certain physical traits, and this study in no way demonstrates a causal connection. But again, that's okay. It doesn't mean, as O'Neill suggests in other videos, that this should be retracted. Not every study needs to establish proof of a groundbreaking new theory. Their conclusion, I think, is quite conservative. Raccoons in close contact with densely populated human environments experience a reduction in snout length, which lends support to the current most popular, but still hotly debated, mechanistic explanation for domestication syndrome, making raccoons a good population to study if we hope to observe a species domesticating in real time. They then end by cautioning that their results also show how environmental pressures like the climate can complicate these observations. pretty reasonable, I think. And personally, I'm just happy that researchers are using tools like iNaturalist to collect data and add more research to support or rebut popular hypotheses about the flora and fauna that we interact with every day. After all, they could be using iNaturalist to find poisonous mushrooms to kill people. Just saying.
Come here, buddy. Come here.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.